Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning everyone. My name is Anggi Arifuddin Setiadi. I will be the moderator of today. And of course, I would like to thank International Program Communication, Universitas Islam Indonesia, for arranging this webinar and giving me the chance to become the moderator of today. And our topic today is from soundscape to photo documentation, unlocking the sensory experience as a methodological approach. That will be presented by Dr. Zaki Habibi. Make the soundscape is not easy thing to do because it's not just all about photography, and a soundscape sound or combination of sound that form for areas from immersive environment. So, what should we do make a soundscape? I'm very glad that all of you are come to the correct place, because today we are going to give you all the answer on how soundscape to photo documentation. Before we start discussion, I will introduce Dr. Zaki Habibi first. He is a communication lecturer at Universitas Islam Indonesia. Also, he is a media studies and visual culture researcher with a main interest in the interrelation between everyday life and cultural practice in cities. He is also a documentary photographer. He holds a Master of Media and Cultural Study from Edith Cowan University in Perth, Australia, and a PhD in Media and Communication Studies from Lund University, Sweden. His doctoral research in 2016 to 2020 used a combination of ethnography and photographic method. This project investigated the ways in which the creative collective in Southeast Asian city, from alternative space to live, work, and develop an organic and dynamic interplay between the physical, social, and digitally mediated space of creative space. Dr. Zaki Habibi research areas mostly address media practice, media and memory studies, documentary photography and film, urban media and communication, and creativity in everyday life, mainly in the context of contemporary Southeast Asian urban culture. His academic work have been published as books, book chapter, edited volumes, and journal article, including his recently published book entitled Creative Voice of the City, Articulating Media, Space and Cultural Identities, and Creative Collective in Southeast Asia 2020, and a book chapter in Reimagining Creative Cities in 21st Century Asia, Palgrave Macmillan 2020. Apart from these academic works, Habibi also engages with the artistic realm as a documentary photographer. He focuses on the documentary photography mode in its dynamic ways, opening to a wide array of possibility either in the technological, conceptual, or narrative building of this photography approach. Currently, he is editing his first photo book that explores the relation between place-based memories, documentary narrative, and visual beauty. His photographic related project can be followed on Instagram at Habibi Zaki, and Lens Culture platform www.lensculture.com/habibizaki. And more information about his academic works and previous publication can be seen here bit.ly research portal ILU, and also here to uii.academia.edu/Zaki Habibi. That's all about Dr. Zaki Habibi. Now we will start the webinar. And after Dr. Zaki Habibi present the course and mini workshop, you can ask questions. So feel free to submit in the check box. And you can raise hand, and turn on the microphone. Then ask Dr. Zaki Habibi directly. All right, Dr. Zaki Habibi, are you ready?
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Anggi. You can call me Zaki. Just call me Zaki. Thank you for lovely introductions, quite complete and comprehensive. And I just want to say hi to all the P2A team member. Hello, Anggi, especially in Yogyakarta and in many other cities around the regions. I would say hi to everyone in Malaysia, in Vietnam, also everyone in Singapore, Thailand, and where else? I'm not quite sure because everything now with the online form, maybe our institution and affiliation based in one city, but actually we are speaking in other city, which is that would be possible, right? This morning, I'm speaking from the northwest of part of Yogyakarta, not in the office like Anggi and the team. So want to say hi to everyone first, because I know it would be good if we start with this understanding of the empathetic situation of everyone else, because we realize with this online mode, everyone might be speaking from their own house, might be speaking from their office, while many other colleagues or friends also turning on other Zoom and screen. So now I'm speaking in the corner of one of the corner in my house, and now it's raining, pouring down. Quite chill in the morning, which is good. Not too hot, not too warm, and cloudy sky and good smell. Remember, we are going to talk about unlocking the sensory experience. So I would love to begin with that. Understanding our environment. Please reflect for yourself where you're now, where you're sitting on, following this online seminar or online lecture, and pay attention on the smell outside. Maybe in my place now, it's the smell of the freshly wet soil after the first rain in the morning, which is great. And then the sound itself, it's just drizzling. So it's quite a combination, a good combination to begin this morning. Really pleased to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation from the P2A team. That will be Herman, Ida, Gunawan, and all the team. Much appreciated for inviting me. And also Anggi as the moderator. I will start. I think it would be easier for every one of you if I start to share screen, maybe. Anggi, that would be fine. All right. Can you see my share screen now?
Yes.
Yeah, yes. But before I move on with all the topic and everything, just to double check with the technicalities and practicalities, does my voice, it's clear enough in your place, in your screen? How is it, Anggi? That's my voice, my video, my slide, all good. Perfect. Yep. So just yell if something happened due to the technicality or stopping the slide or maybe other thing, because that will be another like element of sound. For example, if there is not coming up on your screen or on your computer, just let me know, Anggi. Okay. Right. This morning, and also we have discussed it a lot with some of the mentor and also the supervisor in this project, that it would be good also, apart from introducing how actually, or the variety of creative media, but also because at the end of this project or this series of the course, the participant will create collaboratively, will create a kind of a creative media production. But to me, it is also important, since every one of you, most of you are currently sitting in the higher education process, which is actually a very complex process of learning. I think it also would be better and also give more benefit to each of you if when you create a product, it's not necessarily just being a general or just for a task or for an assignment of this course, create a content full stop. I think it would be good if you also rely on the whole process is also part of the whole learning process. From there, I would take this opportunity to introduce a variety of approach. When I mention here as a methodological approach is basically, even though you will see the word methodological, quite hard to pronounce, don't think that this is only about research or academic research. Here, methodological, it's mainly about the way we are going to approach, including approaching our own creative project. So I will not give you a more kind of a step-by-step. You can do this, you can do that, you can create A, B, C media. I believe you all great in that and you have your own potential. But I will give you at least some of the possibilities, something that somehow we as a modern human being sometimes forget with our own potential or possibilities, which is sensory experience. But let me begin with give you a more overview of today's talk from my side. That would be this point. It has at least 3 blocks. First, it's about our starting point. It's even though Anggi already introduced me in general, I will also give additional information in terms of my expertise, my standpoint, so you can get the context why I share this information, why I share this approach, why I share this example or something like that. And then there is an invitation also through this talk that you can also actively engage by testing your sensibility out. I will lead you there. It will be a brief activity. It doesn't require any complex activity, but then you can improve that afterward. And then the second block, it will be about the approach itself. There are 4 groups of approach related with sound, smell, and visuals. And then we can see from an end product how if we combine such approaches into our own project or based on my own experience as well as other Solar's cum creative media maker or creator. And then lastly, it's about a further reference in terms of to see in a bigger picture beyond this course, maybe for the future work or future profession, as well as maybe internship, anything. You can also take a look on that. People out there outside of academia also already actually include this experience for their own work. So that, and since it is an online mode, so you can also see this, and I will help you with the navigating the process. Every time I switch the topic, that would be a navigation in which menu that we are heading to. So let's start with our own coffee. Please feel free. Have a good coffee, a local one. Hopefully it's strong enough to accompany you. I will begin with giving you another context. This is the one that Anggi already introduced you in terms of the previous work, my research, my previous publication. Don't worry, I will share some of the relevant reference or further reading to the P2A team in Yogyakarta, and then they will happily to share to all the participants. And then the artistic, yes, I think we have a raised hand from Chanta. Is there any question? Feel free to say maybe. Okay, maybe it just come up in my screen. Just let me know, Anggi, if there are participants who want to ask something in the middle, feel free to do so. So it won't be just one way talk from my side. All right, my artistic work, some of them can be seen here. And I myself, even though currently back to Yogyakarta, I've just recently returned from Lund, one of the small town in the most southern part of Sweden. And I still have a research affiliate there in Lund University with the online mode. Everything now also working and quite a distant process and everything. And in terms of my expertise, as some of it already mentioned by Anggi, I just want to stress out here, this is also my limitation, right? It's good to realize our own limitation, because from there, we can focus on our strength, and realizing that the limitation will also help us in creating something that is will not learning from the beginning or starting from zero. But please bear with me that my expertise is also my limitation. So all the example, all everything is actually on this scope. So of course you are more than welcome to add this limitation based from your own expertise and area. I believe you will also having that. And in terms of the starting point or my standpoint, especially theoretically and conceptually, I also really be influenced by practice theory. For those who are already familiar, I assume most of you are currently sitting, learning, or working in the relations between the field of communications, media, creative industry, performance, and everything. And I assume you're also familiar with kind of theoretical positioning that sees structure, effect, political economy, and textuality. But my standpoint for this particular talk and in the recent years is actually from the practice theory. From the practice theory, we always swift the attention, rather than we start from the media per se, we always see from the people first. So people first, we always see about the question of, rather than what actually the media or the communication affect people, we always ask about what actually people do with media and with their communicative practices. So from there, it actually affect the way we approach things, the way we approach issue. In particular, one of the concept called media-related practice from Mark Hobart is really also influenced me, not only in my academic research, but also in my artistic work. Because from there, media-related practice is actually useful to understand, investigate the situated practices where it has a social, cultural, and somehow also political impact and political context. And in both my academic research and artistic practice, media-related practice used in the context of urban cultures and everyday life in the city, particularly in contemporary Southeast Asian urban society. Continuation from the theoretical and conceptual standpoint, it's also a few major references that it's also really affect my work, especially like the classic one from Roland Barthes here, his last book, Camera Lucida. And then also the visual culture in terms of method, it's also Gillian Rose and Terence Hank. And lastly, it's also my own, my recently published book, Creative Voice of the City. I think I see raised hand. Is that correct, Lalier? Please, you want to say something first before I proceed?
Lalier?
Or accidentally just press the button? Maybe Anggi can ask Lalier in the chat, and if there's a question or anything, just stop me, Anggi, and let me know. Okay, just giving you a brief context of where I begin with and why I see subject matter, issue, and how and why I choose that approach. That's the point of this introduction. And now I invite you to testing your sensibility out. We are talking about senses now. I'll give you more obvious and beyond the abstract theoretical aspect now. In 2016, the first time I visited this city, Amsterdam, the capital of the Netherlands, and yeah, it's quite an obvious typography in the center of the city, before or in the complex of the museum, which is very, very much in the downtown areas. I believe some of you already been there as well. During that time is actually the city Amsterdam having a specific particular city branding, and they use the tagline "I am Amsterdam," and also the city itself already been known having a duotone red and white, the color as their part of the city identity. I am Amsterdam, the typography in 3-dimension form, it's being put in this very place and also scattered in other place in a smaller size, and attract people, passerby, tourists, and some locals as well. And then it has an impact and also effect on other city. And we can see plenty of this kind of the use of typography as part of the city branding. What I want to invite you is actually your own memory. Maybe it's during this online form, you cannot just go out and walk around and see, but check your own memory, because the city sign using this kind of obvious typographical mark in 3-dimensional form located in public spaces currently are no longer found in major big cities in the northern hemisphere only, not only in Amsterdam, New York, Paris, or any other major city. We can also find it in our own region in Southeast Asia, not only also in the capital city like Jakarta or in Singapore or Kuala Lumpur, but in any other city. Even I have this picture from a small town, or even used to be village, now become a small town called Gunung Kidul in the most eastern part of Yogyakarta. They also use this kind of typography, and somehow using a similarity in terms of the artistic, aesthetic, and the way it is presented. But from Lisbon to Amsterdam, from Georgetown in Penang, Malaysia, to Yogyakarta in Indonesia, from Milan to Malmö in Sweden, I witnessed this. What happened beneath this phenomenon? What social and cultural issue might appear beyond this? To me, that study creativity, of course, it shows a creativity, especially in terms of the city branding and the use of typography into the 3D and physical form. But it also raised a question mark, a big question mark. Why Amsterdam, of course, cannot be compared with Milan, cannot be compared to even Gunung Kidul, but why the city branding looks similar? That's why I use the term many location yet single narrative. To me, it shows a little bit about similarities, but at the same time also reduce the very character of its cities. What I want to invite you all in a simple activity, just call or recall your own memory. Do you ever find a similar phenomenon such as this? And if so, can you find another example, maybe from your own city where you live now, or maybe from the place where you have ever lived before? I mean, like when you ever stay before, or something that you ever passed by during traveling, maybe years before the pandemic. But check that, and I will give you a few minutes. Just write it down in the simplest way in the chat box. The name of the city, the form or type of typographical sign, and your very first impression when you look at this sign. It doesn't matter. I mean, like, it doesn't matter whether it is the same impression like I had or not. It can be anything, right? But please write it down, because here I saw 115 participants. I assume that will be plenty of more examples, because I found it from the north in Stockholm until the south in Lisbon. I also found it in the region in Southeast Asia. I heard also from the East Asia, they also use this kind of typography. Please feel free. Like for example, this one I found it also in the Western Australia, in the port city called Fremantle. They have the colorful letter sign suddenly in front of the main station. It used to be a very humble city, quiet, and suddenly become a buzzing city. And they put this colorful letter, said Fremantle. To me, I was amazed because I used to live there, and then suddenly, after years, revisited the place, and then I felt confused because the place somehow changed from the mood of humble city, that's the character that I experienced, become a buzzing city. So I will give you maybe 2 minutes, yeah, to respond this in the chat, because that would be an interesting to see plenty of example. And also it's actually part of the training to start our sensibility, especially on the visual aspect. Let me know what you have in the chat. I will stop my talk now and see what kind of response that you have from your own experience, from your own maybe travel experience, maybe anything. Write it down in the chat. I've talked to the leader of and also some of the team member of P2A that this webinar, even though it's actually a lecture, it's also nice since it is an online mode. It's also combined with a kind of the semi workshop thing, because it will help you in the upcoming activity and your own project. So by engaging with this kind of a simple activity, I hope you can also see the potential of the topic itself. All right, Angi, do you see any response in the chat so far? Since I can only see my own slide right now. Yeah, maybe I will. We don't have the time to discuss its response, but it's good to know and share that maybe we can explore that and then see that even though we have a global world and usually we use the term cultural diversity, including urban diversities, but nowadays with this kind of aesthetic, even though it's called creative, we can also see a similarity and what happened beyond this. Okay, I see a few examples. St. Petersburg, Russia, from Herman. Nice. In Moscow. Wonderful. And over there, and banner, even in a small city like Magelang, or even in the village itself, say it's Pambudi, the huge and shiny letter sign, even with English statement in front of the main village entrance, Merangen village, rather than, let's say, in Malay or Indonesian, Desa Merangen. Nice. Feel strange. All right. Yes, because I assume you're also familiar with the local language, so you know that kind of letter sign, it's also quite weird for the locals, right? For the villagers. Ang Mo Kio in Singapore, basic script, silver-based letter sign, placed at the beginning of a straight apartment block. Unimpressive, however, strangely compelling the sense of belonging. All right, nice. So far, feel free to add later on. Maybe you still try to recalling your own memory. Thank you very much for some of you who already gives the response here. What I can see is actually the pattern. One pattern, the use of this artistic form, and it looks similarity. I mean, like for some of you who currently study design, for example, you can see that even the use of the font somehow quite a formulaic. There is a single formula, right? The use or the type of the font and the way it is presented. And as we realize that in any cities in the world, every city, even within the same region, they have their own identity and character. Why we need this big letter sign? Because letter, not like visual, they're actually loud and say clearly. And especially like the example that why they use in English, for example, rather than the locals. To whom actually this letter addressed to? Is it to the locals who live there, or it is just to the tourists, or what happened beyond this? Of course, from any angle we can see critically, from those who are like see critically from the angle of, oh, this is just a commercialization of place. Yes, we can see that. What I want to invite you actually from this simple exercise, please do not taken for granted something that it looks happening everywhere globally, but then we forget that there are something that we can question. So I think in this P2A project or the follow-up activity, it is a starting point that by trying out our sensibility here in the context of visual, we can see and we can find issue. What happened with this many location yet single narrative? I use that as an expression of finding the issue. But maybe you can also pay attention on maybe on the design. What happened with the use of a similar font in this typography and letter sign? Something like that. Please feel free to add more example. We can take a look later on. Another activity that I also want to invite you all, now it's on the sense of listening or hearing. To those who have a difficulty or need a special need in terms of listening, I apologize, and maybe you can use this example to do on other sense as well. Don't worry about that. But let's try by listening to the surrounding. What I want to invite you in this small activity or simple activity is actually describe the dominant sound apart from the audio from this Zoom room. Okay, because I know every one of you now, it's at least your account, it's opening this Zoom room, and the audio from my voice, from maybe the house and everything. But except this Zoom room, what actually the dominant sound? But this time you need to express that in word. So in a written word. Let's use the chat box again. And now what kind of sound you hear now? I'll give you an example. Since now I'm talking, so I can use the verbal expression. Apart from this Zoom room, which is my own voice, what I hear now dominantly is the pouring water from this morning rain in front of my house. And it sounds rhythmical because it's not hard rain, but it's also not just a drizzling. The pouring water in a rhythmical sound, something like that. Yeah, coincidentally now that's the dominant sound that I have. Usually when I have a morning Zoom, it's also a dominant sound. It's actually other screen from my kids watching or joining their school program. But this time, since the rain, it's really pour in a rhythmical way, and that's dominant. Yeah, we don't have time to check a look at this response, but feel free to put your response here. It's actually nice and good training and to start our sensibility out. We will go back there from see some example in the chat later on during the Q&A maybe, and then we can use that for a follow-up to create a project or something like that. Thank you for some of you who have responded in the chat. But let's move on to the next part. The last two simple activities, which is from this testing out our sensibility, especially in the recalling memory, recalling visual memories, as well as listening to the surrounding. It's just two simple examples where actually you can begin with. Whether it is for a specific project of this P2A program, or maybe for later on for your own final project, final thesis and everything, or maybe beyond academia, your own artistic project, your own creative project. Because sometimes we as a modern human being, we forget that we have this sense. And what we capture, what our body capture is actually say a lot. That's what I want to say from this. And let's see from other scholars and also other creator, when they really check their sensibility out and they use in their work. I will call the first approach as this combination between sound, space, and the creation of mini history. Two scholars, they also quite creative, because they are, apart from being scholars like I do, they also create a creative project. And one of them is called Walking Lab. I will not talk detail about the project itself. You can take a look in the link that I put here, walkinglab.org. It is part of one of the Stephanie Springay project based in Canada. And from this project, as well as the argument that they built, is actually our human body, the whole body, can be part of our methodological approaches to understand the wider environment. Because sometimes when we create a project, we always think as a very anthropocentric. Everything is for human. What we make, why we make, it just for human, and the impact about what we make or what we create, sorry, just for human. From their work and their experience, Springay and Truman argue that the environment that we live in now, even as a modern human being living in the city or in the village or anywhere else, we actually relate to one to another, not just the nature, but also built environments, history, and everything. We live in a particular time and space, but it's actually connected to any other time, previous, past, and future, as well as space, because the space is actually can be interpreted in different way by the different community and so on. So they use human body by walking, literally walking, as a kind of a particular method. So let's say, even if you are trying to understand a city, for example, or specific part of the city, a space, they suggest a walking method, usually in a group. This walking methodology is not of new from them. It's originally from the 1960s, but at the time, Guy Debord, a French scholar, used the term psychogeography. How actually our mind is actually affected by the way we relate to the geographical surrounding. And then in this project, in the more contemporary situation, Springay and Truman advanced the understanding by using the walking method and combined with other sensory aspects. For example, in this article, A Transmaterial Approach to Walking Methodologies, they explain the variety of the use of sound while doing the walking method. There are soundscape. It's basically we walk and we try to understand the environment without making a recording. That's what they mean by soundscape. Of course, bear in mind, many other scholars and reference use the same term, but with different meaning, slightly different, but actually in the end result, it's actually similar. To them, soundscape is actually you walk to understand the geographical environment, social environment, even political situation within a particular space and time. And then you try out the sensibility of your hearing by pay attention not on the side but on the sense of hearing the environment by walking, and then you make a note. Sound walk is actually walking and then you create a recording process through the walking. Sometimes you walk in a particular direction, repeat again on the same path, or you change the path. It depends on the aim of the project. And then there are other things, actually sonic walk. You already have a recording material and then you listen to that while walking, while doing thing, and then you make a record afterward. So whatever the name are and the variety of this, basically what I want to say here, and the one that is actually relevant here, that by understanding the sounds in the environment where we live in, where we focus on, somehow we can get, or we can create a pattern of knowledge and a pattern of the work itself. Because maybe it's not just the recording that are important, but the whole process, combination between the way we walk, our mind, our perception, and also we will see a different issue. I'll give you a tiny example. Imagine of your own daily routine. Of course, it's way before pandemic, when you have a daily routine from your own place, whether it's home, whether it's a board student boarding house or anything, to your own university where you have a classroom, and then you have the same path every single day.
Saya manut.
I think there are other microphone that is still turning on. Sorry.
Untuk ini bisa untuk apa tadi?
Yeah.
Untuk
Alright.
ini kalau mau keluar.
Hello.
There are other microphone of participant that are on. All right. I'll repeat again. So imagine that you have the same pathway from your own place to the place where you work, the place where you study every single day. But since you go there, maybe by motorcycle, by car, or by public transport, change it by walking. Well, assuming that it's actually walking distance, not very far, or choose this path that is actually walking distance, or you will see a different thing. You will feel a different feeling. So that's the main argument of this methodological approach. And then from this activity by walking, you pay attention on the sounds, whether you make the recording, whether you have the recording something, maybe it's a podcast, maybe it's a rhythmical sound, but it's not a music. It's just something that is abstract sound. And then you listen to that by walking. Then the whole experience, mind and body, then you put a combined record. That's actually their approach. Well, it's quite abstract if you don't try it out. I think you need to try out and then try 1, 2, 3 times to get sense of what exactly we're looking for. And don't worry about this reference. I will compile all the suggested reference, and then you can find it later, and then it can be your further reference for suggested reading later on, and I will share via the P2A team, and then you can read more detail afterward. Another approach is actually from the example of the project called No Void. This one is actually from the case study in Lisbon, Portugal. These two scholars, as well as a creative maker, still about sound, space, and mini histories, they are interested in the ruins in the city. Well, Lisbon in this context have got a UNESCO heritage site in some part of the city, and at the same time also it's a very touristy place. So the city experienced the very major urban revitalization, built environment especially. But of course, in the whole project of development of the city, physically, they also experience many abandoned space, or they call it urban ruins. In this project, rather than they just simply understand sociologically about what happened beyond this ruin, they approach using combination between soundscape, understanding the space and environment, and creating mini history. By mini history is actually about how actually the city experience the more than human space and interrelation. For example, one of the example in one of the urban ruins is already occupied by nature. And then what happened there? But rather than just presenting it in the simple way of a journalistic way, capturing by pictures and then by feature story and then report it, they combine and produce a series of photograph, a podcast, and the podcast is actually invited expert to talk about or being interviewed about the particular issue. And then the podcast is actually edited together with the soundscape in its urban ruin. And then we can hear, you can check and take a look at the project site, and then it will lead you to the SoundCloud and some of the example of the soundscape and the podcast when they are edited between the podcast and the soundscape all together, and it become a rhythmical, because their aim is actually not just about giving an information, but sharing the affective experience of the leader and the team members of this project to understand that this is what happened to the urban ruins, what actually this ruin fell about. So it's about more than human, because it also talk about environment, it talk about nature, it also talk about habitat, it talk about physicalities, it talk about built environment. By using soundscape rather than simply make a video, for example, the attention of the readers or the viewers or the listener is actually more on the affective focus rather than just simply the cognitive one. And that's exactly the main point of their project. They want to raise awareness by creating a similar affective attention rather than just simply, okay, I know that's urban ruin there and here and there, and that's all, because they want to attract more attention. So I think that's the main point of using the soundscape, is actually to attract more affective attention from our audience rather than just simply tell them. Because by choosing other form, maybe you can, of course, you can make a video documentary, but then it's simply an end product, and then whether the audience watch or not, and then full stop. But if you want to attract there, because we as the creator, we were there, we were in the place, we experience fully with our body, because walking, listening, and now it's also about smelling, then it give attention more on the affective side of our audience rather than just simply the cognitive. And from there, usually audience will think thoroughly, compare with their own understanding, and hopefully affect their understanding on that particular subject matter. So that's the point of this. Similar with the sound, I will move on with the smells now. I remember in 2017, if I'm not mistaken, I joined a workshop in Singapore, and the workshop is quite unique. It's just called Smellscape. Well, and also the workshop of called Rephotography. And then in 2019, I joined another workshop also called Smellscape in Lund, Sweden, and also similar activity. We basically working in the designated area by the facilitator, but rather than we take a pictures, rather than we make a note, we simply walk slowly and try to smell everything that attract our nostril in the environment that we walk. And what is actually the aim of this activity? Similar with the soundscape, is also testing out our sensibility that we somehow as a modern people sometimes forget. that smell also affect understanding. And somehow smell also, I argue, help to recall memory. And at the end, if we collectively combine all these experiences, it could lead to understand perhaps particular cultural identity. I'll give you an example. This is from the work by Tan in Singapore, where he studied about the control of smoking. It's not the smoking itself that is actually controlled, but the smoke by the smokers. And from this study, as you're already familiar, whether you live in Singapore or work there, or maybe some of you already have or visit Singapore, the city country Singapore have a very strict control in any layers, including not only the pollution, big pollutions, but also the smell of the smoke coming from the cigarette. And it's already become a policy that is actually not allowed without any designated area of smoking area or something like that. And Tan study the smokers, but rather than studying and creating a project that is actually simply sociological or anthropological and try to understand the structure, he study and follow the smoke. So that's what his word is. He actually follow the smell in public space. And then from there, he talked to the smoker, try to understand, but not in this sense of giving empathetic view, but actually to understand the combination and the interrelation between the regulation, the strict regulation from the government, and then the urban space, and then the people itself and the smoke. So smell here is actually become a tools, instrument for him to follow the issue. So he, in his work, he explained that one by one. Of course, you can take a look at that. And then at the end, he have and built an argument that there is actually the olfactory politics, or the control of the smells in the city, especially here in the city state like Singapore. Because there is, by following simply a smell of the smoke from the cigarette, he can talk further about control, about power, about politics itself, and about regulation. And he even play out the word that even smoke in Singapore, it's also part of the censorship. He play out the word with the censorship in our general understanding of censorship. But here, the scent, or coming from the any kind of create smell, is actually part of the censorship here in this context by the state regulation. In this work, Tan didn't argue that whether the regulation is bad or good or bad. No, in this particular work, he actually just to see the complexity that by following the smell, you can see a bigger picture of complex ideas. In this context, is actually about control, power, and how the people in Singapore actually try to have an everyday tactic to in this imbalanced power relation, and it due to a smell of the cigarette or this the impact of the smoking. So again, in this work, he also didn't argue about whether smoking is good or bad for the health. It's not that focus. The focus is actually how censorship, or like this one he mentioned, is actually part of the control by the government, and it also affect the way people behave. That's what he mentioned. In my own work, I also use this olfactory politics in the context of durian. I assume here, no, I don't need to explain what durians is. In my book, I need to explain a half page just to explain to the global audience what durian and what is actually a fact. But what I found here is actually interesting in the case of Georgetown, Penang, and also you can explain this in other places in Asia, especially when durian, who the king or the king of the fruit, who has a very strong smell, somehow have a very much an effect to the driver in the airline and everything, and we understand that because that's for a safety reason. But in this case, I found from the pictures on the left is actually no durian, dilarang membawa durian, don't bring durian in any public space in the city, which is to me looking at the everyday life of the people who mostly also love durian, and is also part of our tradition in the tropical place during the season. It's also celebrated. So to me, following the smell, and here combined with the photo documentation, I can say more. It's also similar with the tan work. I can see there is also about smell control, and at the end, it's about cultural resistance. Because what I found here by resistance, it's not political resistance. You go to the street and having a protest, but it's more about, okay, the government create dilarang membawa durian or no durian is basically for the sake of the global tourists who are not familiar with the strong smell. But for those who love, who favor the fruit, and also part of the local, even though you don't really eat that, is actually part of the local tradition during this season, like this one, Mau Sang King, one of the famous celebrated durian type in this area. Then people celebrate that culturally. So they keep doing that next to the no durian public side. To me, by following the smell, I can see and talk further about bigger issue, about a particular subject matter. And using that kind of particular approach is actually argumentatively strong, as long as we relate to, maybe it depends where on your own field, maybe a particular concept in your own field, or maybe a particular theory in your own field. In my case, is actually I use this case of the smellscape of durian to check that there are cultural resistance in the context of Georgetown as UNESCO World Heritage Site at the time, 2008 until 2017 in my study here. There are a strong resistance against the nationalist heritage imagination, because once the city received UNESCO label, the city changed quite rapidly, and then there are national idea of how to become heritage. But for the locals, they've been living there, and the way they've been living in the last 500 years, it's just the way it is. So it's not just for the tourists or the tourist case, it's actually how they live in a very cosmopolitan, multicultural, and with all the tension, of course, but it's part of the way they live. So I use the example of the smellscape of durian and its control is actually, and then the way the locals responded as part of the cultural resistance is actually to see the tension between this nationalist heritage imagination against the everyday cultural practice in the city. So I think you can use this similar approach in your own context, in your own field, and then from there, by following the smell or the previous one, creating the soundscape, and then you can see a bigger pictures, or maybe you can talk argumentatively using your own work and product to see more abstract and or more important issue. That's what I mean by this approach. I offer you to have a short break, maybe Anggi, 3-4 minutes. It's good to have this kind of short break, especially with the online mode, so everyone can stretch and see outside, so then we can pay attention more on the screen later on. How do you think? I will turn off my video for, what time is it now in my place? Yes, now it's 8 past
8.
Yeah,
8 past 8.
8 past 10.
Yeah.
Let's see again and recollect here at 20 past 10 or 20 past your local time. Is that good? So we can refresh ourselves, get some drinks and everything to move on.
And smell
Right?
something.
Okay,
Just a
thank
short
you
break.
so much.
The Zoom room remain open, so you don't need to leave the Zoom room, and then we just need to refresh and stretch ourselves. We need to fair to our body.
Okay.
See you later then.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much for Mr. Zaki Habibi. And then break. Okay. Lagi break.
Tap out liền anh này. Thôi nhé. Là bơ.
Okay, everyone. Any question about soundscape maybe? Please text it to chat box. We'll break for a while, 5 minutes maybe. Okay,
Hello, back
thank
again,
you.
Anggi.
Okay,
Hope you already refreshed yourself. I think it's good. I use this short break is actually based on also a research in conducted in the last almost 2 years due to the pandemic, that especially on the intention of the not only the physical health but also the mental health, since now everything is online on screen, our attention, it's also good to have a movement, yeah, another aspect on the physicality and build up our sensibility. And Anggi, I have seen a quite some of the responded here and responses here in the chat on a both activity. It's thank you everyone. It's interesting, and I think it's also quite a word to save this on the chat, because it's interesting. You can also get inspiration from others. That's the point of this talk. Actually, you cannot only just get inspiration from my talk, but also from others or other participants. We see here, for example, apart from this case or example from Singapore and Saint Petersburg, Magelang, and then Bromo Mountain even, and then also an example from the sounds, not only the sounds of rain, but also an eagle flying above house. Wow, interesting. And also then it's also an example on the smellscape, the case by Iwan in RMIT campus in Australia, and even it has a very huge response from the authority, and apparently it's due to rotten durian. How actually, from this example, is actually another good example how actually smell can create a very serious response from authority, and smell can be a starting point to talk something further. I think it's from this example you can talk further maybe about the way usually the authority in Australia react to something in terms of the maybe on the threat, and then it's already famous in many literature about the way the Australian authorities react to the threat on the national security and everything. And this time it's from the smell of the durian. And then from there you can talk further, not just the phenomenon of the rotten durian, but maybe other things. Thank you for sharing this information. Lovely to hear and read that. And feel free to add more example, and then you can share with others here in the chat. That's the point of this small activity. May I please allow me to continue with other approach. Can you see my screen, Anggi, and other participant? Yeah, just coming back from the short break. Still with me, Zaki, speaking from Yogyakarta. To all of you, wherever you are now. And we are still in this session on the methodological approach to inspire you with the possible way to create a specific creative product using a creative media, but not simply just creating content, but you have something to say about, argue about. That's what the point of this presentation. Now we are heading to the third approach, which is actually the sense of our sight or the visual. This is what we call as photo documentation. I will relate back to this classic book by Roland Barthes, his latest book, the one that's published before he passed away, and then it's been reprinted again. And then in the end of this book, specifically talking about the way the photograph affects us as a human being, he said the two ways to see photograph. Even he used the capital P here. The choice is mine to subject its spectacle to the civilized code of perfect illusion, or to confront it in the awakening of intractable reality. In this statement, Roland Barthes actually speaks beyond the technicality of photography. He speaks on the philosophical positioning of the photograph seen by us who see the photograph. So what I want to invite you, and why I use this as a starting point to talk about photo documentation, sometimes we as the one who press the shutter, I will not talking about the technicality of taking photograph, because I believe in the current time, everyone already experienced how to take a photograph with any devices, digital devices, or even analog devices. It's not something that I need to share again here. And I believe the aspect of technicality, even though it's also important and very important, but it's actually something that you can develop further while learning by doing, on ongoing, following your courses and everything else, and you can learn from your own practices. What I want to share here is more about the positioning, how we position, how we look, how we see, and using photography as part of exploring our sense of seeing. Because many photographs, according to Roland Barthes, actually don't say anything to him as the one who see it. Even though it's about, I quote, even though it's about horror event, but since it is presented in such a way, for example, from the journalistic report in the newspaper at the time in this context, it doesn't speak the horror itself, because sometimes to inform the horror aspect here, horror, it means the conflict of this within a particular society, or maybe the horror of trauma. You need other visual impression to deliver that meaning. That's what he means by this statement. And in general, photography can be used in a different roles, actually. If photography can be the research object, if you study photography, or if you using a photography studies as part of your core investigation. On other occasion, photography is actually also a tool in a particular approach when you use photography as one to create a project, digital art, for example, or design or something like that. It's a tool. In other contexts, it's also an instrument to collect data, like in the research or in the research for creating a project. Maybe it's not a visual project, but you use photography to understand that. In other contexts, it's also an analytical instrument itself. You use photography to analyze, and it's possible. You use a visual analysis. So you use the visual to analyze. This is the one that I use, actually, the combination between a tools and an analytical instrument. On other occasion, and it's also relevant in this P2A series, is also photography as a form of presentation. You might talk about the smell, you might talk about the impact of the sounds, you might talk, but you use the photography as a form of presentation of the subject matter that you want to discuss about, that you want to foreground about. And the object itself, or the photographs, also have a different roles. It can be the visual illustration when you create a narrative and then you want to use that, or the data if it is related to a specific research. In other contexts, it's a visual company to your field note. Maybe you use it as part of your pre-production process. And then it's actually, apart from you make a note on your notebook, it's also you use a note using visual data. I use that when I study about the new public park in one city in Indonesia, in Bandung. And I use my the photograph that I made, both the photograph of the public park and the screenshot of the GPS location of that, and I use that as a company to my field note. I didn't present that information in my end product, but I use that information, but without using this photograph, both from the location as well as from the screenshot of the GPS coordinate. I cannot create an argument, I cannot create something. So that's an example of how photographs also can be a visual company to the field note. In other contexts, it's also instrument for storing and recalling memories, or it's called remembering, and a space of particular impression, emotion, affection, practice. And don't forget that photograph is also a mark of time. So I think in this context of this P2A, you can actually optimize the very character of photography and the photograph itself it depends on what the aim of your project, and then you can also not just choosing one but actually combine the different roles, as long as it's clear enough since the beginning what roles why I use this photography as my approach, and what actually the end result of the photograph I will put on in my end product, whether it is part of the research or whether it is part of the creative output itself. Looking at this is just I will just give you in a glance the context of why we use photography. What I want to stress out here is actually we are not positioning ourselves in this context as the professional photographer. We also not putting ourselves as an artist. I believe in the next week you will have another session. Will be informed by a scholars and photographer Panitza Almark, and also a photojournalist as well. In that context, how you use photography as a part of the professional position. But here in my session, what I want to stress out here, it doesn't necessarily that you have the profession or the professional ethic and the professional technicality as a photographer per se, whether a professional photographer or whether an artist that use photography as your key medium. No. Because photography nowadays is already on people's everyday life and people's hand, right? We just want to use this as the possible roles that I've mentioned earlier. And it has the capacity, according to Gillian Rose, that the cultural significance, social practices, and also issue on power relation actually embedded in every visual image. There is a dimension of reality, not the reality itself, because the reality is a complex thing, right? We know that reality is constructed, reality is historical, reality is sociological, reality is really temporal. But dimension of reality that without photography, it's sometimes unrecoverable because it frees the moment. And in my work, the photo documentation, the particular approach, is actually a form of using photography to investigate a particular subject matter. By taking a series of photographs in details, considering the documentary mode, so not using a studio-based approach, so I work mainly with the subject matter in their own and the subject person in their own environment. I don't change the environment. I came there, bring my camera, and even I changed my camera into the smallest and the simplest one to make it not too obtrusive to my my subject person, and then taking a series of photographs in detail, anything that I think it will be valuable. In this process, it's not about myself as a photographer artistic mind and opinion that are expressed in my photos, because it's not about my mind and my artistic positioning, but it's most importantly about the detailed exploration on the subject matter scenes through a visual medium, here the photograph. The photo documentation is actually produce a visual commentary on a chosen issue. So once you choose the issue and a particular subject matter, then you find the space, the environment, the community that you are going to investigate further. Then from there, you document them visually in detail to find the context-specific truth. The truth, quote unquote, is always a debatable term, right? But because it built up by many elements. But at least using this photo documentation approach, we can actually offer a dimension and the context-specific truth based on our own case. This is one case based on my own project on understanding the transformation of urban cultures in Indonesian and Malaysian creative city. Of course, it won't cover comprehensively about the transformation. It only covers a dimension of reality, but is actually context specific. In this context is actually the change, the nature of the visual change in the city. One of the example is from Georgetown in Penang, Malaysia. Once they gained the UNESCO World Heritage Site along with Malacca in 2008, the city visually changed by many artistic project in the public space, the use of street art, inviting a famous street artist from Lithuania like Ernest Zakarevic on the right hand, but then also followed by commission project by the state using 3D installation, but then it's also followed by private institution like hotel, gallery, museum to create their own version without any common ground why we need this. So in my study, I used my camera to collect in detail all the information, not just the artwork, but the environment where the artwork are located. And then also using another photo documentation to collect many material, including such as this brochure. It's actually a travel brochure about the common pattern in the tourism industry and tourism campaign. But to me, it also says something else. And I combine between all these elements from the photograph I made and also the scanned copy of this brochure with the voice of the people that I also want people to hear about. For example, from this independent animator and graphic designer who initiated a collective in the city. He himself is also as a visual artist, but he raised a concern about what happened in the city. Yes, it's good that, as he said, everyone else think that, hey, Ernest here, he mean Ernest Zakarevic, the famous street artist, can draw, and I can draw as well. And then other people come and draw in a very not standard and of drawing quality, and then somehow there is a pattern that a lot of artists want to be. They come into Penang and draw something on the wall. They take photos and take photos of themselves, and then in the name card they say I'm a street artist, and that's all. And in other they are going I'm a street artist and so on. So he actually just want to raise concern. What I want to stress out here in this particular example and the case study, that my approach by collecting photo documentation will not say anything thoroughly, because the photograph is actually in detail only. To contextualize that photograph, so I combine it with this visual tourism brochure and also with this code and voice from the locals, and then it presented in such a way. Of course, it depends on the form of the presentation. If it is a book, maybe you can combine it in this particular layout. If it is an exhibition, maybe you can create a typography, a design, and particular sense of the material. But at least with the variety of this material, you can combine one to another into a very specific form of presentation. All right, I see a response here on the screen. Is that a response, Anggi, from the participant writing down on something, or is that something else? Let me repeat again then.
Okay, I think no.
Oh no, I thought it's a question or comment or something. All right, if there are no other comment or question related to that, it's just another example from other city. This time it's from Bandung, Indonesia. Similar. So I collect in detail, and one of them is coming from the building of the Bandung Creative Hub, the designated creative hub made by the government. But to me, it also say something problematic, and I use the photo documentation approach to collect a very detailed element, not just the situation and character of the building, but also to see, for example, like this plenty of do not do thing, do not this, or in Malay and in Bahasa Indonesia it's called the dilarang type of public note, is actually paradoxical with the idea of creativity, where actually you have a freedom and relatively free to do different things, and in this case is actually limited, even though it is in the designated creative hub. I use that material, so it's not mainly about the information of the place itself, but I use that character, and I even intentionally use the type of photo collage like this one as part of my presentation rather than just one to single image to to build my argument, because then I use also the technique of juxtaposition, like in the comic, juxtapose between one and other element from the same space. This time it's from the city street. How actually just a few minutes from this luxurious look building, they are actually an everyday daily experience. What the meaning of creative city actually? What actually the imagination of creative city? Because I have a critical position using my photo documentation to say that I position myself to problematize the practice of aestheticizing. Well, it is actually just a concept that I borrow. So you can also do so by borrowing a concept from your own field. Then you build your argument based on your material. To me, in this particular context, by creating the look that is actually good looking, it doesn't necessarily create your city to become a creative city, because the everyday experience, everyday cultural practice are remain the same. Or basically, the essence of creativity can be found in the chaotic everyday street rather than the look that we design in a specific way but neglect the voice of the people. In this particular context, for example, without doing the photo documentation, I cannot say my three key essential argument on that cultural memory on display is problematic, that creating this superficial visuality it's also problematic, and that there are spatial struggle or the tension of the use of space in the city from the locals and from the people. So without making this photo documentation, I cannot build these three key essential argument. And that's the main point of this example. This isn't just another example from the same city. I will skip it through because it's quite similar, but this time it's about the use of the media. Just to give you a hint, maybe it's not quite relevant with this short term of the project of this P2A, because photo elicitation and photo voice is actually need or require a more longitudinal process or more longer process than photo documentation. I want to put it here to give you a sense and a hint. Maybe if you have time or further project, further time, longer period of project, then you can also include this as your part of your approach. I just want to stress out here the difference. In photo documentation, it's still you who press the shutter. It's still you that actually have the subjectivity on creating visual image based on your understanding of the concept, your own involvement in the participant observation. Even though you can make a dialogue with the subject persons that you work with, but it's still you, whether you are the researcher, whether you are the project leader, that press the shutter. So you design the visual image that you created. But in photo elicitation, is actually the subject persons that we study, that we ask as a collaborator, as we ask a participant, that press the shutter. And we don't create any limited framework or anything. I remember in 2010, along with one of the mentor here, Ms. Gunawan, right? Hi, Gunawan. We collaborate to create this photo elicitation on the issue of local cultures. How we invited a group of people in 4 cities in the island of Java to take pictures based on their understanding of their localities, and then from there we ask them. So we use the photograph to dig deeper about information, about impression, about context, and many other things on the issue. And then in photo elicitation, sometimes we as the project leader or the project initiator might be also part of the frame. Like this time, for example, that's me. Of course, that's me a few years back. If it just look different. The camera, it's actually, I gave the camera to one of the subject person. At the time, I give you a little bit context. I joined a group of a handmade maker to understand their everyday routine, creating create a craft with a hand. So I joined them, but I gave the camera to one of the informant, whatever she wanted to take a pictures from any angle, from whatever, and then she created quite a plenty of images. And then from there, I share the picture, and then from there, I start to talk and discuss few other things about the tools that they use, about the space, why they choose this table, for example. And then from there, many layers of stories come up. Without using this photograph, these layers of story during the regular interview or conversational interview might be hidden because it's too sensitive, or maybe people just forget. But by using a photograph with this character of freeze the moment, then my subject person can tell the detail about the history of this table and who have been sitting in there, famous people, common people, what kind of activities. So I started with the table to talk about social network. So even the photograph is actually not part of the final presentation, but the story itself. But that's the difference with photo documentation. Photo elicitation is just the photograph here is actually just the tools. And in other situation, I can also combine with the practicalities and material object of this example is actually a postcard. The elicitation here is using the screenshot method of the photograph, but then it's actually made by the subject person that I investigate and study and learn about. So the use of postcard is actually part of their social network bonding, even though in the digital time, they still share the use of material object. And then from there, I build an argument about the sensitive object is actually important within their network, from the example of the use of postcard, the use of vintage suitcase, the use of handmade maker, and also the fabric tote bag and other sensitive object. But without giving a subjectivity to the persons that we learn about, that we become our subject involvement, we cannot tell further. So that's the point of photo elicitation. This one is somehow deeper, and again, it also takes more time because it's actually part of action research. In the main inspiration, it's from Paulo Freire and Ivan Illich, especially in the Southern America in the 1970s. And then because it's actually not just about the photograph itself, it's about the people empowerment and the social learning. And from there, again, the photograph can be made by anyone in the marginalized group. It has to be done longitudinally, so people come and go back and forth many times, because the idea is not about the end result itself, but it's more about the social change to empower this marginalized group of people. So yes, that's about all the approach, and I just want to give you a hint about the end results, how the possibility to combine several approaches. Let me repeat again this sharing screen. This one has an audio.
Dr. Zaki Habibi?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. Remain to you for presentation in 5 minutes away, maybe?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
thank you very much for the reminder. Yeah. Yes, this is just a given a hint of the possibility of combining all that approaches into one end result. For example, this is the photo documentation and the soundscape. Can you hear? Yeah, you get the idea. The idea is actually just that, for example, why don't I just make a video, for example? Because the video, the end result of the video, create an audience just to look at it and then passing by. But by combining between the photos and the sensory of, this is a rhythmical sounds of the way they work using hand. And my argument is actually to show that the labor of love, how they actually love to make anything from by hand, and how it actually affect their identity as a craft maker and something like that. In this example, I just want to give you a I invite you on the paying attention on that individual photo. It is not too interesting. What is the point of this? It's just a snapshot of form or listing of things in there in the environment that I have the focus on. But combining that, so in photo documentation, sometimes the individual photograph is not really compelling and not excited at all. But combining with many elements in the series, then it can say a few things. All right. You get the point that the main point of that argument is actually that it just to show how actually their place is actually not just their office and studio, but also the feeling of home. I talk a lot about feeling of home using the combination of photo documentation and soundscape. The feeling of being at home, that's the one that they want to pursue rather than just feeling being in the office or studio work. Because without having that feeling of home, the creativity that is part of their everyday routine won't be part of their main spirit. That's the main point of this. I think this is just another example similar, so I can stop there. Then if we still have time, then I can give you more example. The last 3 slides is actually just to give you a hint how then we present our end product into a presentation, something like that. All right, thank you very much. I think that's the main point of my talk today about variety of various approaches on the methodology. We still have a few more minutes. If we have some question maybe or comment or anything that you want me to share further in terms of the more example. I'm looking now on the chat room, Anggi.
Yeah.
I think there are a few question and comment.
Yeah. Okay, on the chat box, we have Mr. Herman. Mr. Herman
Yes.
say,
yes, Herman. I think your 2 question is we can respond that is actually a rhetorical question, right? Because everyone already know the answer. Yes, the basic answer, the simple answer of this is actually yes. How can we create creativity or boost creativity in the very organized and restricted? But in many other places, that is also very restricted due to political situation, due to authoritarian regime. People still show creativity actually, because if we think back to the very meaning of the essence of creativity, creativity is not just about making things. Creativity is actually survival tools of us as a human being. Without creativity, we as a human being won't be until this point in the civilization, right? So coming back to your question, ideally, of course, creativity can be boosted in the environment where free and accommodating environment are provided, like in the long study by Mihaly in 1995, 1997, when he interviewed 98 creative figures, and he concluded by there are 2 key points that creative person are not born but formed. And 2 factors that is actually help them to boost their creativity is, one is the involvement in the field yearly or in very long term, and secondly is the supporting environment. But then this view is also criticized by David Gauntlet in the 2016 by saying that, well, now with the very complex situation of human being, the digital environment and anything, and also the different political situation in different society, we cannot rely just the supporting environment, even if it is during or in the restricted environment. Structurally, people can still find the way to push that, and sometimes limitation is actually another factors that boosts up creativity. So it depends. I think the answer, it depends whether we think about the ideal positioning or practical and cultural practice. But I want to add one more thing on this question to Herman, that in my study, I also argue about the organic way and organic space of creativity. Based on the group that I study, the organic and process is actually more important rather than the structure way of making things. Well, we need plan to do things, yes, but in the process, you need to be very flexible, dynamic, and inorganic. By organic, it's not just random thing, of course, but you are open with many other ideas from other people's, and flexibility throughout the whole process. That's what I can say. And for the next question from Eldon, so
Entonces,
striking, I think art form are divine by the artist intent. Yes, instead of yourself, express the emotive which bring me to understanding. I think it's more a statement rather than a question, and I fully agree with that. Thank you very much for that. If I can share additional comment to this, may I just give you a hint of example? I think it's quite real, very, very much related with this comment by Alden, Anggi.
okay.
How actually, sorry, this is just another example of the use of soundscape. This one. In this case, this is the work by an art collective named Tromarama in Bandung. You can take a look in their website. You can see that. I'm happily to share it in the chat later on, maybe, if it is more easy for you to click the link. In this case, they create together with the member of the artist, but also with the participant. Sometimes they combine, for example, with this work Domain in 2019, Tromarama combined between the participant, which is a digital media user or the social media user, the real-time internet-based data, but it's actually made by the user, of course, not just by the platform. Whatever they make, they combine into this visual presentation of wave with the color, and they create a pattern of the color. And actually it's attract attention on the audience about how actually the virtual and the physical entangle one to another. So for example, when we do this, like using Zoom for digital lecture or digital seminar like this, we forget that the physicality is also take form. And this artist group create that aspect of physicality by change the understanding of the digital data into the physical form of wave, and then present it in the large screen in the gallery. Then people can experience that by themselves. In other groups, it's more complex by Team Lab based in Japan, but nowadays they become an international art collective, not just an artist, but also architect, computer coder, computer generated animator, even mathematician, also part of their team. They even go further, not just asking people to create image, photograph, or many other images, but also involved in the immersive way of the presentation of the end result. And I think for this example, it's already like really, really complex one. Of course, it's in the context of commission art. You can take a look some of the example in teamlab.art. I can happily share the link later on as well. So I think it's also a response to the question by Eldon that it's also changed the subjectivity of the issue from us as the creator, as the artist, as the researcher, into more constructive dialogue with the participant, with the informant, whatever we name them, and also with the audience. And okay, Eldon also responded, I think it's responded to the Herman question on that, about the adaptability of us as human beings. Yes, indeed, it's about the adaptability, and art is actually the very effective way to show our adaptability in an abstract form, because it communicates to us about the emotion, not just about the form itself, not just about the information. So it goes beyond the information and even beyond the use of media itself. Thank you. There's one question. What is the most difficult case situation that you have made so far? Can you share with us? Well, what is this? I think in terms of all the approach, the if I may, whatever the situation and time and places, of course, every community have their own characteristic. Whether I work in the free society or I work in the authoritarian society, of course, it has a difficulty. But overall, what I can say, the hardest challenge is actually our own framework. We also never have a free subjectivity, right? But our subjectivity is actually constructed by our own knowledge, our own experience, our own theoretical understanding of things, of people. So that's actually the hardest challenge, whether as a researcher or as a creative maker. Why? Because we somehow bring our own framework to understand and create things. And that actually problematic, because our own framework is actually a starting point. Of course, we cannot delay it and avoid that because it's already embedded and embodied even in ourselves. But do not make that to change our sensibility, the way we see people, the way we see things, the way we see place, location, the way we perceive and create perception as free as possible, or at least we can take a look from a different perspective. I think my strategy is always like, of course, it's hard to be fully free. We cannot be fully free from the framework. But the way I try to understand is actually by try to understand from the perspective of the people that I met, the people that I studied, the people that I investigated. That's why it's always good to meet people rather than just rely on the digital data, for example. Let's say I start to focus on the environment of the internet or environment of the digital environment or digital communities, but I want to meet the people because person will give more perception and impression. And from there, I can change my framework. And from there, then I can see a pattern, a new issue, a new pattern, and I can deconstruct my own framework. I think that's the hardest challenge and the difficulty to me. And maybe some of you also experience that. For example, when you hold the camera, whether it's just a mobile phone camera or your own digital camera, sometimes the way we see is already have our own framework, the way this technicalities of the tools or the camera, and also the all information from the courses. Oh, I have to make this composition, I have to make this angle, something like that. Well, in this context, I put myself, I'm not a journalist in this context, even though I used to work as a journalist. But in this context, I stopped being as a journalist. I stopped being as a researcher. Even I stopped being a photographer. I'm just simply a human being that hold the camera and press the shutter or press the sound recording devices. But that's just a technicality. But I want to experience the way people experience their place, their community, their city. So I try to put myself on other people's shoes, something like that. And from there, I develop my understanding. And somehow at the end, I also deconstruct my own initial framework. And I learn a lot from there. So I think the hardest challenge is usually in the beginning, because our own framework, if you are an anthropologist, if you're learning sociology, if you learn psychology, if you learn communication, then it becomes our own mental framework, and somehow it creates a border. We have to change that. We have to leave that border and framework before we can create something interesting, new, with offering a new perspective. I think that's the hardest challenge and difficult situation. Not the case itself, but our own framework that really limit ourselves to see variety of things. I hope it's also addressed your question and your concern. Vari accent. I'm not practicing. It just, I think it's just embedded in myself. And what else? Thank you. I really appreciate your well done. The value and what use is art. Wow, this is a very philosophical. Well, now it's a 1 minute to 11, and the hardest question come from Eldon. What is the value and what use is art? I even for those who study aesthetic as a philosophical aspect of art, they spend years to address this question. I cannot offer you a very simple address. I think the what I can offer you is actually it's a process. To me, even to myself, the value on what is art is actually an ongoing process. In the beginning of my realization of why I do this thing, why I use this media, for example, I of course started with the positioning myself very naive that I can use these tools, the communicative tool or the media itself, as part of the instrument to change situation, of course, in that naivety. But then after years, I realized changing or even social and cultural change are a process. I'm just a tiny dot, tiny part of the whole connection of this. So what I can understand that the value and the use of art is actually a process of us as a human being that live with other human. And the situation always and keep changing. Even let's say with this global situation of pandemic, you mentioned about adaptability, art also need to adapt, and we as a human need to adapt. If we going back to your question about the value and the use of art, the answer, of course, you can find philosophically from the branch of philosophy. It's called aesthetic. But to me, beyond aesthetic, it's also human empathetic relationship. We as a human being living in the anywhere in the world, we have our own difference. Of course, we have our own histories. Even what we mean by memory, our own memory also keep changing. So the idea then the value of what use and art is actually to understand empathetically of how to become human being living with other human beings. So I think that's my answer. And of course, the definitive answer, it will keep changing historically with the condition, situation, and also talking about the media as well. Creativity and innovation in the literature, usually people and also you can also add another term. It's called discovery. Creativity, discovery, and innovation. Innovation, it has a very both political economy and also economically meaning most of the time if you find in the literature. And usually that when you add some new value on object, on process, or human being, or place or space into valuable and marketable in that sense. But to me, studying philosophically about creativity, innovation is actually about more about the way people articulate the creativity. It's not necessarily about market things. It's not something that has to be marketable or something, but something that actually an articulation of the creativity, because creativity is a very an abstract thing. You don't necessarily have to create something. Creativity is also about adaptation and about reaction and about how to respond to the changing nature of environment, of people, and sometimes in an abstract way. And when you articulate that into more both tangible and intangible, then it has a level of innovation. And again, socially and culturally speaking, innovation is usually have the pragmatism or the pragmatic reason that it has a advantage to more wider people, not just to yourself. So I think that's the difference between the creativity and innovation. And discovery is just the bridge between the creativity and innovation. And I want you to wider your scope of attention that beyond the economics of the meaning of the term, because I think it just limit yourself that anything that is creative, anything that innovative, anything that discoverable, it's not necessarily have to be marketable. It's about coming back to my response to Eldon, coming back about the way we value our position as human being living with other human being in this historical situation. All right. Yes, I think Herman also add more about the meaning of the art and humanity and nature. Nowadays, also art is also related with more than human life. It's not just the anthropocentric of our life. We live with other subject, and now we live with virus as well, right? We have to understand that, and actually that's part of the way we understand our self collectively as a human being, not just individually, and we have to deal with that. We have to realize there are other creature organism that also take place in this nature, and we need to make balance to make sure that humans and also civilization keep continuing, but also without neglect other roles of non-human aspect. I think the last part of this response is already beyond our methodological approach. I think it's good response. It's already become a more philosophical. I'm happy to provide many any other time maybe to discuss about this. But I think we are running out of time. Anggi, make sure that I don't leave some question. Make sure that I already address all the question in the chat.
Okay. If there are no more questions. Oh.
Imitated others'
Pam
creativity.
Budi, Mr. Pam Pam.
Yes, imitation and becoming an epigon of everything, especially in the cultural world or even in the creative industry. It's not something new. It's not just recently, of course, especially with the force of the economy of creativity or the aspect of the market. But even if we're coming back to the process of creativity, we start our adaptability by this principle of paying attention, then we follow what we pay attention on, and then we modify that, which is common process. But the problem is when we institutionalize something that we follow from others or we imitate from others, that's the problem. It's fine to modify it from other example. I also get inspiration from others, from you all guys here, from your own Instagram, from your own social media image, from your own work. I also learn from my students when they create their project and everything. I also learn from them, and it inspired me. And then from there, I modified that. But the problem is actually the institutionalization of this imitation. I think that's the problem. When we claim our modification as the so-called the most authentic one or something like that, or the most original one or something like that, we have to clearly say that this is modification. It's inspired by this and it's by. So that's why in my work, even though let's say it's a collective exhibition or presentation, I always begin with drawing insight from or getting inspiration from this work. I always clearly mention that to make sure that I get an inspiration also from other work, from other people, from other situation, whether in the same space, time, or any historical context or any different media, something like that. So I think that will be all from me now. I hope it's not giving you more confusion in terms of, wow, now it's a possible way to create different things. So my intention, and also I already talked to Herman and other team member of the P2A, that it's actually a positive. I tried to create a positive provocation in terms of you see different thing, you experience different thing, and your experience matters. That's the main point. And from there, you can build up your creative product that is actually based on your own concept, based on your research, based on your understanding of the people, environment, and that matters because our experience individually actually contribute to the collective experience for all of us. Well, apologies if the way I talk, the way I present it is maybe too quick or too loud or not too clear enough. I'm already preparing the further reference and suggested reading to those who are interested to read further. I will share it to the P2A team, and then they can happily share to all participants so that you can also learn in detail from other work as well, including my own work academically as well as artistically. So I think that will be all from me. Thank you very much for your attention, your participation, and your response here in the chat as well as in other. But I hope the way I presented these ideas also somehow can give you an insight for the short term of this project, the P2A project, as well as for a longer project in the future for your own benefit, whether on your own study as well as on your own professional work. And I wish the best of luck for your study now and also in the future. Back to you, Anggi.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Dr. Zaki Habibi, for the presentation. Okay, maybe to take a picture with Dr. Zaki Habibi.
Take pictures.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I will help Mr. Anggi. Please, to all of the participants, to open your camera so we can take a picture together with Dr. Anggi. Tim, you can.
Okay.
Okay.
3,
Okay. 3, 2, 1. Okay.
Okay. Next slide.
More?
5 more.
5 more.
Yes. The second time, 1, 2, 3. Okay. The third one.
What should I do then?
Yay! Cheese, say cheese. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Next, 1, 2, 3. Okay. The last, 1, 2, 3. Okay, share. Thank you so much,
Okay,
Dr.
thank
Zaki and everyone. I beg
Thank you very
to
much
Mr.
for the
Anggi.
invitation, P2A team, and also for the organizing, great organizing. Thank you, Anggi, for facilitating and moderating this session, and all the technical team there in Jogja office, and the co-hosts in other cities as well, in Malaysia, in Da Nang, in Vietnam, and also in Kedah, in Malaysia, and other hosts, and all the network. Thank you very much. Even though I cannot see you in person right now, but I do hopefully, in the near future, we can see each other in person and maybe can collaborate together. So be safe, everyone. Keep healthy.
Okay. Yeah.
And be enthusiastic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr.
Assalamualaikum
Zaki Habibi.
warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi. Once again, I'd like to thank the speaker for the informative and interesting presentation from Dr. Zaki Habibi, all the participants for the very active participant, and the organizer for the webinar, International Program Communication Universitas Islam Indonesia for making this webinar happen. I'd like to apologize if there are many mistakes from me as a moderator during this session. We hope you learned something today and hope you can find this sharing session informative and useful. So happy Friday and have a great weekend. We will see you again, guys. Thank you and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Ya, assalamualaikum.
Warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Have a good weekend. Thank you, Mas Zaki.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. See you.
Bye.
Guys, goodbye. Salam dari Bidai.
salam dari Binjai.
Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi. Thank you.
Hai Miss Ida.
Thank you.
Mas Ayo. Kamsahamnida.
Hamida.
See you later.